we're taking a detour from Yasumi Matsuno back to the year 1995. Front Mission is right at home with the games I covered early on in this channel. Created by Toshiro Tsushida, who also created the Arc the Lad series, and developed by G-Craft, his company that also developed the first two Arc the Lad games. Later on, around 1997, G-Craft would be swallowed up by Square, similar to Quest. There's a Matsuno parallel for you. Front Mission for the Super Famicom was never released in the US until its DS port in 2007. We'll report on that next episode, but for now, let's look at this 16-bit tactical RPG that boasts the art of Yoshitaka Amano, the supervision of Hironobu Sakaguchi, and some designs from Tetsuya Nomura. Gameplay. Front Mission feels a bit bare bones by today's standards. Your time is split between story cutscenes, which play out with character portraits and dialogue boxes. Cities, where you can listen to patrons at a bar. Fight one-on-one with other mechs at the Coliseum for extra cash, or go to the shop for items and upgrades for your mech, also known as Wanzers, which stands for Wanderpanzer. Panzer? Which is German for walking tank. Assuming it's pronounced like a German W, that would make it Wanzers, which does sound better than Wanzers or Wanzers. Oh yeah, and also battles. No surprise that the battles are the bulk of the game. Front Mission throws you into the first battle with no preparation and pits you, a level 1 unit, against a level 40 unit. Thankfully, Front Mission isn't cruel enough to massacre you right at the beginning of the game. Your fiancée Karen, however. The battle system is more similar to Bahamut Lagoon than any other tactical RPG I've ever played. Like Bahamut Lagoon's battle system, you are open to counterattacks if you attack close up with fight, also known as melee, or short-range attacks. There's not a whole lot of incentive to use short-range attacks in Front Mission. In Bahamut Lagoon, you get more experience for felling foes at close range, and in Front Mission, this can also be the case. In Front Mission, you get experience for destroying each individual part of a mech. So peppering your opponents with missile blasts and then going in for the kill with a machine gun that can hit multiple parts in one attack will usually earn you the most experience. What undermines this risk versus reward experience system that should lead to more tactical decisions is that most of the progression of your stats is tied to your mech's parts. And upgrading to the most expensive parts is easy enough after the first few battles. The experience does level up your pilots, gaining you better accuracy and damage output from the weapons they're using most. Here the game is nudging you to stick with the same weapon type, either long, short, or fight, instead of bouncing between the three for your individual units. Again, the game undercuts the strategy of specializing your units when you acquire good enough engine output parts that allow you to stack 2 missile launchers to the shoulders of each of your mechs and can bombard the lazy AI with little risk because they politely wait for you to come to them more often than not. I'm being a little unfair. The early game has you make more interesting decisions on how to gear up your Wanzers because of the weight/engine system. Do you want a unit that sacrifices HP and defense to maximize movement and accuracy to carry out hit-and-run tactics? Or do you want a slow, tanky build that might get bombarded by a few missile volleys before it gets anywhere close to the opponent, but takes those projectiles like a champ? The worst thing I can say about Front Mission is that its AI is mercifully stupid. There were times when I put my main character too far into the line of fire, and in this game, if you lose Lloyd, oh yeah, that's the main character's name, you lose the game. Sometimes your opponent will go hard and focus your weakest unit, and because losing the body causes the mech to explode, if the CPU gets a few lucky hits in, you can go from full health on all your parts to a smoking pile of rubble in 2 turns if luck doesn't roll your way. That said, when the computer opponent just sits there patiently and doesn't go all in when they outnumber you 2, sometimes 3 to 1, I don't know whether to be thankful or disappointed. Would the game be too frustrating if the AI was harder? Or would I have developed some real interesting strategies to get Lloyd to lure them towards choke points and club them to death with giant mech batons? Maybe we'll find out in the sequels. There is something exciting about maxing out your gear on each mech, as tedious as this game makes it, and then deploying your fully decked out squad into unknown odds. I suppose you could challenge yourself by not putting on the best parts onto your mechs, but when all it takes is maybe 10 minutes of grinding early game to get enough money to keep pace with all future upgrades, it's hard not to give into the temptation. The battles in Front Mission are long because of the randomness of the targeting and the multiple health bars for each unit per each mech part. There are also just a lot of units. I think there were battles where I deployed at least 13 and the enemy even more than that. Side note, you get special abilities later on that let you aim for specific parts, but I found those guided shots missed more than half the time anyways, so I gave up on sniping early on. Story. You are Lloyd, at least in this version, a Vonzer pilot that watched his fiancée blow up at the start of the Larkus incident that sets off the second Huffman conflict on the island of, you guessed it, Huffman. A year after the incident, you are recruited into the Carrion Crows, at least in this version, a mercenary group on the side of the OCU. The OCU being the Oceania, fuck, I don't know how to say this. The OCU, which is the Oceania Cooperative Union, includes South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Australia. They are up against the USN, the United States of the New Continent, which equals America! North and South. And I believe it takes place in like 2090 or something crazy like that. I'm pretty sure it's the translation, not that I'm not grateful for it, that is holding back the story in this game. The presentation also lacks a certain oomph when the only good cutscenes that set the vibe for the game are at the opening credits and the very end. The dialogue reads like a rough draft. Having sampled the first few battles in the DS version, I can say we have a much better localization on the horizon. But a quick salute to those who translated this version of the game. We appreciate your service. We'll leave the story at that. In the next video where we talk about the DS game, I'll dive into spoilers to prepare us for any changes in the remake, and go into the added content of the DS version. Music. The conversation about this game wouldn't be complete without mentioning the music. There, I mentioned that. Just kidding. Composed by Noriko Matsueda of Bahamut Lagoon fame, and the more famous Yoko Shimomura of, everything else. The soundtrack matches the personality and the aesthetic laid out by the opening cinematic. The longer skirmishes have me wanting more variety in the battle themes, but the music used for towns and story sequences are, and I gotta mention that ending suite as well. Holy moly. Check out the soundtrack for the game even if you don't play it. And the Super Famicom version with that god-tier sound chip blows the DS out of the water, from what I've heard. In conclusion, Front Mission for the Super Famicom lays out a solid though sometimes tedious foundation for a franchise that is rebirthing this year. Those interested in diving in may want to wait until my Front Mission for the DS review. It is a game that is begging for quality of life improvements due to its age, but if you like changing out each right and left shoulder weapon, each left and right grip weapon, each right and left arm, each body, each leg, each computer, and each backpack for each of your Vonzers before stocking up their items before each battle, then dig in. On the next episode of the Tactical RPG Odyssey, Front Mission. Again? For the DS. Oh, okay.